Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 20th, 2018, and I understand today is the vernal equinox. I just looked it up because Justice just mentioned it, and I don't know, am I used to it being on the 21st? Does it sometimes fluctuate as between the 21st and the 20th? It doesn't matter. It is today. I looked it up, 12:15 Eastern Daylight Time, oddly enough. Won't be any signs of it around here as it is cold and rainy, about as cold as it can be and still be rainy. And as a matter of fact, it's not expected to stay as rain. Kids sorely disappointed that school was not canceled, though likely to be the case tomorrow. They are certain they will be stranded in school with no way home, buried under feet of wet, heavy snow, and the buses won't be able to get through. And I guess it's a likely possibility. I don't think they'll be dismissed early, and I think it'll probably not snow terribly badly until they're almost home anyway, but they're disappointed nonetheless. But they should be excited to get one more snow day. Pretty rare this late in March for the Washington, D.C. area. What are we going to do today? What should we do with our not yet snow day and, the equal amounts of daylight and darkness? I think we could probably, because of the extra daylight that we've saved from daylight savings time, I guess, maybe we'll be able to cram in more stories about Cambridge Analytica. There's very little else that really is, well, I don't know how to say it. There's very little else that I'd really like to spend time on, I guess. I want to know everything that's happening here, but there's so many other things that are related and things that are not related that we have to get to today, as a matter of fact. News breaking as we speak. We'll get to that in just a moment. Daily Co's Radio is live now. I need someone else to tell me this, and I figured I'd get a guy from Maine to do it. It's true. We're here to make sense of the Cambridge Analytica blow-up. The short version, they're evil. Okay, thank you, Bill. That sums things up nicely, and now we're done with it. And that's really all there is to it. There's a lot of interesting intricacies to it. The story is exploding in England, which is where I guess the most aggressive investigative work about them is being done. Thank you very much, fellow English-speaking country, for doing that. Before we even get to the other stuff, I guess breaking news, school shooting underway, or under investigation anyway, in Maryland. St. Mary's County Public Schools in Maryland report a shooting at Great Mills High School, St. Mary's County, down in the south, I think the southern portion of sort of the eastern shore section of Maryland. So those of you who, I guess, I don't know, what would you think of the shape of Maryland as a giant meat cleaver? Down at the bottom of the blade there is, I think, where St. Mary's County is. And, situation there, not entirely clear. All the news outlets are reporting, and I mean, it is all that they're reporting, and they are all reporting it the same way. I guess they got a statement that said the incident is contained. Nobody knows exactly what that means. Nobody knows what the situation is. Is it somebody who came to shoot up the school? Is it somebody who dropped the gun in their backpack and it went off, as sometimes happens, believe it or not, in schools? Because, hey, bring your gun to school. What the hell? Who cares, right? And, we'll have to wait and see. And NRA and gun lovers everywhere salivating, looking for the opportunity to call this shooting in a school something other than a school shooting. We'll see whether that develops and whether they have a case for that or not. And, of course, we wanted to spend some time today excoriating the dotard president for not saying anything about the Austin bombings, except we also have not said anything about the Austin bombings. The difference being we care, and he doesn't, but there's no outward evidence of that. And so we'll have to catch up on that story. I believe I saw a report of another explosion in the area, though it's not entirely clear that it is the work of the same person. This time it was a package headed for Austin that exploded at a FedEx facility in San Antonio, which is not Austin, but because it had an Austin address on it. I guess it's like we're getting sensitive about explosions involving Austin or something. I mean, come on. I don't know what's happening here, but lots of interesting discussion that this has engendered around the web and around the world about the fact that, there's been no comment about it from the White House, that, for instance, Andrew McCabe, somebody did point out, now dismissed from the FBI, was actually instrumental, I guess, in wrapping up the case against the Boston marathon bombers. So it might have been useful to have him on hand for that. But he was due to retire anyway. So, of course, he was due to retire because he was being forced out. So, take it for what it's worth, I guess. And many other things swirling this morning, including the news that apparently divorce is catching. It's a contagious disease. Donald Trump Jr. now in the mix, but also, Dan Scavino jumping in on the bandwagon as well. Everybody's getting divorced. More news on the Donald Trump Jr. situation. Apparently, he was carrying on a side romance with a former Apprentice contestant, and that is because, of course, all Trump enterprises of any kind are essentially dating services for dad and the boys. I don't know whether Ivanka ever took advantage of the situation, or Tiffany for that matter, but, why get into television shows? Why buy pageants? The answer is because if we command the contestants of a beauty pageant, and we can, of course, sneak in backstage and watch them change, well, then we can make the best selections for sex captives to claim are our spouses or girlfriends or what have you. And hence the interest in beauty pageants. And of course, Donald Trump loves being on television. I'm sure there were many reasons to do The Apprentice. It was a big moneymaker for him, etc. But one of the instrumentalities of it that he appeared to enjoy most was attractive women could be lured into his orbit with the promise of an appearance on The Apprentice. And if dad didn't want him, the kids could pick him up, and I guess that's what happened here. Word is that it was a woman by the name of Aubrey O'Day, who is, I don't know, a person of some renown, I suppose. Whether that was the case before appearing on The Apprentice or not, I have no idea. She is in this screenshot here in that I've seen on Twitter, thanks to Joe My God, a fine Twitter account. This screenshot identifies Aubrey O'Day as project manager pop star. I don't know whether she's project manager in the game, The Apprentice, and a pop star elsewhere, or what. Those of you who are pop or know what is can tell me whether or not Aubrey O'Day is a person of much note, but now she is. So your life is over too. So congratulations to you. Let's see. What else have we here to clean up on? The Warlock has a comment. Looks like M will be fired. Are we talking about like from James Bond? Mueller. Okay. Top Republicans are sending Trump a message on Mueller. Do what you want. We won't get in the way. That according to your good friend and mine, Laura Clausen, writing over at Daily Kos. Let's get up to speed. I think that's a good call there, Warlock. Donald Trump is working himself up into the kind of tantrum that generally ends with him firing someone. Someone is, of course, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who he targeted by name in tweets over the weekend. And congressional Republicans are sitting back saying, oh, he won't do it, so why bother stopping him from it? If he does it, then maybe we'll respond. A pull quote here from Politico story. I don't see the necessity of picking that fight, said number 2 Senate Republican John Cornyn of Texas. And that's the most accurate description I've ever heard of the man. He's absolutely number 2 and a senator. So, and from Texas. So they got that all right straight down the line on that one. Cornyn said leaders have sent the back-channel message to the White House, through Russia, I guess, that Trump must not fire Mueller. But he seemed resigned to Trump's deepening attacks on the special counsel. I can't control that. That's his decision. I don't think that's helpful. Well, you can't control what Trump tweets, but you know what you can control? His ability to unilaterally fire Mueller. You could pass a bill that would make Mueller's firing subject to review by a 3-judge panel to be sure he's not fired for illegitimate reasons like Trump wanting to cover his own ass. And I mean, that's a big undertaking. That should be a public work that we depend on the government to handle. I mean, covering that ass, really, that's probably something we can only do as a public function. I don't know that there are assets, no pun intended, available in the private sector to pull off a feat quite like that, even with the number of billionaires we have running around today. GOP leaders probably feel like they don't need to say it, added South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been among the Republicans who have pushed back the hardest against Trump's attacks. Sure, let's go golfing. You spend your capital on issues where you think you get the best return, and I don't think anybody in our conference thinks Mueller is going to be fired. I don't. Laura continues here, with all due respect, Lindsey, how stupid would everyone in your conference have to be to think Trump wouldn't fire Mueller? That's a rhetorical question. And how stupid do you have to be to think that's what everybody in your conference thinks? Note bene here, the respect that's due is virtually nil. I don't know if they know what to say. What do you say? Stop it, said Representative Mike Simpson, a Republican of Idaho. Trump is going to do what he's going to do. He is going to do that, but of course, I mean, so was, let's say, I don't know, Pablo Escobar. So what do you do about that? I don't know. Let Escobar be Escobar, I guess. All right. I mean, we could have him join the Republican Party. Will that make it better? It used to be that you would say, no, by God, there's much more to it than that. Why you have to be, I don't know, fiscally conservative and hate abortion or something. Well, that's out the window too. Laura concludes here, again, if what Trump is going to do is fire Mueller, then you, as a member of Congress, could push for a bill protecting Mueller from firing. This whole, oh, what can we do? We have no power here. All we can do is sit back and watch stance is about as dishonest as Republicans get, and that is saying something. Shoot, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell didn't even issue a pro forma statement saying he supports the special counsel's independence and thinks the investigation should be allowed to continue. That's how much Republicans are letting Trump know that there won't be real repercussions if he fires Mueller. That's the same McConnell who blocked former President Barack Obama from blowing the whistle on Russian attempts to interfere in the 2016 election, by the way, before that happened. The more Trump rages against Mueller's investigation, the more guilty he looks, and the more Republicans sit back and let him, the more it looks like they might have some real culpability here too, which they do. So we're glad Laura brought it to our attention, and more to the point here on the show that the Warlock brought it to our attention. Dave Gilligan is next in line, though the Warlock has another comment queued. Gilligan! Does anybody ever do that to you? I'm sure everybody does, right? I'm sorry about that. I don't even have the captain's hat on. I didn't deserve to say that. Okay. What are the odds that Trump will blame failure of the FBI to catch the Austin bomber on the ongoing Russia investigation? Good question. I hope he does. It would be a great opportunity to point this out once again. He tried to blame the failure to catch the Parkland shooter on the FBI's ongoing Russia investigation, and nobody but us seemed to notice that he was basically saying, then that blood is on your hands. They're investigating you. They could be doing something else, but instead they're unraveling your treason, and you killed those kids. I'm not really bothered by having to draw that conclusion. I mean, it's sad that we have to conclude that the President of the United States is killing people. We always know that to be the case, no matter who's the president. But I mean, people here just walking around the street, minding their own business, going to high school. I guess that's the conclusion he wants us to draw. Fine. People in Austin are being killed because the FBI is too busy figuring out just how much money Donald Trump is stealing and where, when, and with whom he is spying on the United States of America to our detriment and to the benefit of Russia. Interesting question. Thanks for bringing it up. Warlock's second comment here. Will Cornyn face electoral consequences for doing nothing on Mueller? Let's think about that. No, probably not. Although, it's always, of course, possible. But when is John Cornyn up for election? I guess we should check that out next. Let's see. What class is he in? We'll look him up in the Wikipedia here, and we'll see. Let's see. He was elected last, I guess, in the 2014 elections. Oh, does that mean he's up now? I thought the other one was up, Cruz. Is that not the case? Or maybe that's when he assumed office as Senate Majority Whip. So when was his last election? Let's see. He was first elected, assumed office. Oh, yes, December 2002. So where does it say what class he's in? All right, reelected to a third term in 2014. So, yeah, what is this? All right, so 6 years, 2020. All right, so, Cruz, I guess, is up in 2018. He'll probably be the one facing the electoral consequences for John Cornyn's position. And it is only 2 years later, and of course it will be a re-election year for Donald Trump, so he'll be at the top of the ticket. It's certainly possible, and I would guess that the outcome of what looks like it's shaping up to be the O'Rourke and Cruz election in 2018 will have a lot to say about that one. It's difficult to tell whether, who knows? I'm terrible at predicting because I never want to close the books on the prediction. But it's hard to believe because we're still in sort of YOLO, LOL, nothing matters mode here. Certainly if Cruz were to be defeated in 2018 under the crushing weight of the disaster that is the Trump presidency, Cornyn would have to be considered vulnerable. Of course, if Donald Trump doesn't last in the presidency for whatever reason until 2020, I guess depending on how he goes out, that will change the calculus for John Cornyn. If he were to have a heart attack and drop dead, for instance, would Cornyn suffer electoral consequences in 2020 for having defended him in 2016 and 18? Probably not. Depending, I suppose, on whether, let's say he has a massive heart attack and dies and Mike Pence takes over and things get worse, which is always possible because he's a theocrat. And, I don't know what direction he would go. Of course, if he stabilized the government in the sense that, yes, he's a raging idiot and theocrat, but if the trains ran on time, would things be okay for John Cornyn? Would there be, for instance, would the resistance to the Trump-Pence regime be even more broad if it were run by a semi-competent, regular-type politician with the flexibility of being able, I guess, we'll call it flexibility, to be able to don the Trump mantle when chaos was necessary, or, making some sort of idiotic, chaotic policy choice and pursuing it semi-competently? Would that make people more comfortable with theocracy or more insistent on removing it? I have no idea yet, but the optimistic outlook is rarely warranted. So I don't know, but a lot, it depends on how Trump's tenure plays out. If he's removed from office in a reign of scandal and is impeached or otherwise removed from office, then surely John Cornyn pays some electoral price there, although I suppose there's always the reactionary vote in Texas that would view the targeting of the president as unfair, and therefore his supporters would be boosted. I don't know. Sure are a lot of moving parts to it, but I certainly hope so, and for the moment, it should be assumed to be the case with an eye towards keeping whatever momentum there is of the blue wave of 2018. If it materializes as expected, we'll want to keep it going. And Cornyn, having been a major defender of the Trump administration, hopefully you can keep that momentum going in Texas. And I suppose bombing the capital of Texas repeatedly isn't likely to help things either. All right, let's see. What's getting exclamation points here on Twitter from Zerlina Maxwell this morning? A Kyle Griffin tweet, and it has to be a Kyle Griffin tweet because 65% of Twitter is, of course, Kyle Griffin tweets. The Trump Organization lawyer who signed court filings to silence Stormy Daniels was also the lead counsel defending class action lawsuits against Trump's now defunct real estate school that allegedly scammed thousands of students, the Daily Beast reports. That is rather interesting. I don't know if it would get 3 exclamation points from me, but it would get some googly eyes emoji from me, although I like to just type out eyes emoji rather than actually use the emoji. I don't know. I think that's funny. It's an interesting point. We'll put that one aside and see if we can't get back to that one. Have we taken care of all our comments? Yes, minus the comment of Kate Sherrill, who says, okay. She's sending me the story of that package bound for Austin, which blew up at a FedEx building near San Antonio. Perhaps we could get some more information on that one. Today's man, it's a hell of a day. What should we do? I'm going to go over to Pocket, and there are like 10,000 things that we need to read. And we could be reading all about Cambridge Analytica today, although I assume that you have read a lot of the reporting on it by now or have gleaned the important points from others. Something I wanted to share with you yesterday. I was disappointed in my bracket pick over the weekend, talking more about Felix Sater when I could have, on Friday, spoken more about Cambridge Analytica. So I feel like we missed the big explosive tip of the weekend, but it's always guesswork, and it may very well turn out to be the case that in next week, the week after that, whatever, the Felix Sater angle blows up, and I'll say, aha, see, I told you. I just guessed the wrong weekend. But we've been pretty good about getting things right on the proper weekends. One of the things that I meant to share with you, I was talking in the background via Twitter with Greg about this one, and as a matter of fact, I ought to scroll back a little bit here and see what else it was that we were talking about. We talked more about more craziness from Cambridge Analytica. Yesterday afternoon, the BBC's Channel 4 finally aired their Cambridge Analytica story, and things went bonkers in England all day long. It was really like almost like a Trump hotel, the Panama City hotel situation. People not quite barricading themselves in the offices, but Facebook and Cambridge Analytica both wanted desperately to block the BBC from airing their segment yesterday. They weren't able to do so. There was some explosive video being aired, sort of almost James O'Keefe style undercover video, except that they weren't dressed as, well, neither was James O'Keefe actually dressed as a prostitute in his filming. We all know that. Something forgotten. Not as a prostitute, but as a pimp. But same thing for him. Anyway. Filming top executives at Cambridge Analytica, including Nix himself, allegedly, well, they did do it. I mean, I see it. But they deny that they were doing what it looks like they're doing, which was to say, offering up not only, well, we do lots of data analysis, but we'll also send Ukrainian sex workers to your opponent's house or office and try to frame him in a sex scandal. Really? I did not know that that was part of your menu of services. Oh, well, we subcontracted out. That did seem rather ridiculous. And now the company is apparently trying to claim that they were merely kidding about that. Essentially, they were trying to weed out. I guess they think that they were expecting one day to be entrapped in a hidden video situation. And so they like to try and weed out serious prospective clients from undercover reporters or whatever by try to suss out their real intentions by talking about such ridiculous projects as entrapping people with particularly Ukrainian sex workers. I wonder why that would come up so often. They could get their sex workers from anywhere, really. There's plenty to go around, many of whom are actually, not necessarily captives. And so you could promote the voluntary sex work that's out there. If you can find it, it's probably a rarity to call it entirely voluntary. Anyway, the point is that they offered up these bizarro services, offerings of services, to see whether they were really talking to a serious client. A serious client, I guess, under this claim would say, "What? No, I'm not at all interested in that. How dare you suggest such a thing?" And, I don't know whether that's really going to hold water or not. But I did mean to bring to your attention the article that I think we read it yesterday, and we'll just read it today, and we'll do it after the break, would have shed some light on why it was that all of this news was breaking in England rather than here. And it's not just because we have such a timid press here, as is generally speaking the case, and a more aggressive press in England, despite the fact that I think it's actually easier to sue them. But they were uncovering the tale because, of course, they have experienced the same phenomenon that we have. These bizarro, or heretofore unpredicted outcomes in elections that Cambridge Analytica has had a hand in. And much more than that, lots more experience with Russia than we might have imagined. We'll get to that story after this break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's impossible to catch all the way up on everything that's happening, but let's try and bring you up to speed on the Cambridge Analytica story without necessarily reiterating every bit of the story, though it's hard to resist the temptation to do so. We might have to dive back into it. By the way, if you weren't following along, we got the tip yesterday from Greg to return to the Twitter feed of Carol Cadwalader, or however she pronounces this, unfortunately, not that easy to figure out. Cadwalader, I'm going to guess, is... I think that's the usage or the pronunciation I've gone with. She, a reporter for The Guardian and Observer, and late adopter, early giver-upper in her profile as well. She's been doing a fantastic job for the longest time in unraveling this situation and doing great reporting on Cambridge Analytica from the British perspective, which has been running parallel until now, I guess, with the American experience with Cambridge Analytica. And you knew that those streams were going to cross at some point. And that was always the point, I think, of her reporting. And big day then for her. But we got the tip yesterday that we ought to be checking in on her Twitter feed again. And it paid off. And Greg sent me this from the afternoon yesterday. Her tweet that says, "Wow, Britain's information officer announces she is seeking a warranting," interesting usage that they have over there. A warranting, like a warrant we would have, to raid Cambridge Analytica and seize their servers. There is a thread that follows. To be clear, it says this is she links here to the Twitter feed of Christopher Wiley. He, of course, the profiled former Cambridge Analytica technologist, programmer type dude. I forget exactly what position he held, that we heard about and was interviewed extensively and was in the position of whistleblower on Cambridge Analytica's real intentions and real operations. So as she's saying, to be clear, that was Chris Wiley's work. He gave a dossier of evidence. Dossier. Now you know you're gonna lose in all this. No one uses the word dossier unless they're ready to be trampled on in the public relations games. He gave a dossier of evidence to ICO, and I guess here we're talking about the what is ICO? Information officers. I don't know what the C here is for, but to the ICO. Who's ICO? I'm not that familiar with the bureaucracies over there in the UK. Let's just Google it and see if we can figure that out. ICO. Are we gonna get a real answer, or Google answers everything as though we're Americans, which we are, but it doesn't answer the question for us for what's going on in England here. Let's see. ICO investigations underway. Here we go. Let me click on that. That's an article in, what is the name of this publication? It's Ars Technica. Is that how they say it? ICO is mentioned in here. Now, that's Bitcoin crap. Okay, well, at any rate, I don't know if it's that terribly important, and probably by now some of you have sent me some information on what that is, but less than interesting is what that stands for. To be clear, this is Chris Wiley's work. He sent this dossier of evidence to someone important last month and has been fully cooperating with the authorities. Facebook has been cooperative, and that's in scare quotes, with ICO, says Elizabeth Denham. Cambridge Analytica, on the other hand, has required them to seek to use their statutory powers to compel evidence. So, less than cooperative. And I gathered from yesterday's reporting that there was some resistance when they arrived at Cambridge Analytica's offices, and that apparently some Facebook personnel were there providing this resistance. I'm going to skim back to yesterday's tweets from Carol here and try and use those to bring us rather quickly up to speed before I share with you that linkage article. Why is it that so much of what has gone on with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and others in the United States is directly related to what went on in the UK with the same actors? Why were they acting in both places? Why would Russians be involved in both? And how far gone really are we? And how applicable is what they're doing and discovering over there to what we have going on over here? How far back do we need to go to capture this? We'd, I guess, be about 20 hours or so back in her timeline and sort of read along from there. Let's see. Does this go further back than 24 hours? I mean, it was a hell of a day. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Maybe what I ought to do is take a look at what time the tweet came from her that Greg shared with me. All right, well, at any rate, let's see. Chris Wiley, by the way, one day ago, she was also tweeting at this point, Chris Wiley suspended from Facebook. How about that? For blowing the whistle on something they have known privately for 2 years, he reminds everybody. So yesterday, I guess, when we led off, or where we left off on the show, was the Facebook folks were denying that this was a data breach, of course. That is to say, the 50 million users who had their information harvested. What we learned yesterday during the show, and then with a little bit more substantive backup by the end of the day, was that Facebook considers it not to be a data breach because they didn't lose control of data in their possession. That is, no one hacked their way into the computers and stole it. They maintain that it was given up voluntarily by the people who, for instance, downloaded that psychological profiling app that was offered by a third party related to Cambridge Analytica, but not Cambridge Analytica itself. They claim that this was a separate entity, but of course, the person who was running it was the guy. That was the guy who ended up being a professor both at Cambridge and St. Petersburg University, oddly enough. And he gleaned this information from people who gave it up to him voluntarily by downloading and using his app. What nobody knew was that the app also scraped information from anyone who used the app was also friends with. And that really, by no definition, does any of those people have any of those people given their permission for their data to be used. So that was the big explosive story in the first half of the day. Let's see. Scrolling through her account of yesterday, we also have, here's a new piece here. Facebook misled MPs, they're saying. Zuckerberg needs to testify to Parliament. So that now developing there in the UK. Wiley suspended by Facebook. She reports here, plaintiff phone call from Chris. He's also banned from WhatsApp and, outraged voice, Instagram. But how am I going to curate my online identity? He says. The millennials' first great whistleblower, Facebook hitting him where he knows where it hurts. Let's see. Carol passing on the tweet of Kathleen Burke saying these people have ties to Cambridge Analytica, many of whom will be, of course, relevant to us. The Mercers, we know, Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani, Ted Cruz. Remember that Ted Cruz was actually the first choice of the Mercers and the first one to start working with Cambridge Analytica in the 2016 cycle, but he was quickly abandoned by both the Mercers and Cambridge Analytica, which makes sense as they had a stake in Cambridge Analytica. They were paying for Steve Bannon to sit on the board of Cambridge Analytica, etc. Ben Carson also has ties. Tom Cotton, John Bolton, Tom Tillis, Kellyanne Conway, Julian Assange, Hogan Gidley, David Bossie, and Scott Brown. My goodness. Oh, and also Carol adding here, Nigel Farage as well. Then, let's see, a teaser for the Channel 4 News piece that runs about 20 minutes or so, if you would like to take a look at it yourself. And it was pretty interesting, I thought. Not blockbuster stuff once you got past once you had absorbed the fact that they were saying they were willing to send Ukrainian sex workers to entrap people. After that, you didn't see them doing it or anything. Not that blockbuster. Julian Assange then later tweeted to Carol, "Where's my tie to Cambridge Analytica, you libelous fraud?" We'll see how she responds to that one. Let's see. Just sort of threading through her points of yesterday. Let's see. She's retweeting here Jason Kint's tweet that says, "Spot on. Facebook is facing an existential test and its leadership is failing to address it. No one had heard from Zuckerberg yesterday." Let's see. Hats off to the Financial Times, FT, for their Facebook Cambridge splash. Sad to say there seems to be an idea elsewhere that this is tech stuff when it's actually about some of the fundamental parts of our daily lives and massive ethical questions for the companies who oversee them. Carol passing that one on. Lots of reactions to the Observer's work from yesterday. Let's see. I want to get to... okay, also pointing out, OMG, 21 hours ago, Facebook's share price down $30 billion in the first 2 hours of trading. Good question. And then a picture of the chart. Wow, price falling off the cliff. Emergency debate, she notes, in houses of Parliament on Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. Most outrageous aspect of this, says the Secretary of State for Culture, was suspending the whistleblower's account. Facebook has serious questions to answer. Then she tweets, great chutzpah from Alexander Nix, CEO of Cambridge Analytica, on Newsnight tonight. Coming out Butch Cassidy style, all guns blazing. The Guardian's fake news first in the firing line. That's what Nix had to say on that. The Guardian has been propagating a lot of this misinformation or fake news, was his big response. And then the big warning that they were about to go live with the Channel 4 news piece 18 hours ago. Prepare to be gobsmacked. Bribery, corruption, compromat. Channel 4 News, in association with The Guardian and Observer, goes undercover. The news story available here, and I guess I'll open this tweet up so that I have for you to view the piece later on and see exactly what they saw over there on Channel 4. To be clear, as she said, this is all Chris Wiley's work. He gave the dossier of evidence and has been fully cooperating. Facebook, not so much. Now, into the breaking news of last afternoon. Damian Collins, chair of the UK Parliament's News Inquiry, has called Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Chris Wiley to give evidence next week to Parliament. I predict fireworks. Then the question, what is Facebook doing at Cambridge Analytica's offices tonight? Good question from MP Damian Collins. This should be a matter for the authorities, he says. Exactly. Let's see. Then an offhand joke from Chris Wiley saying that the $30 billion loss was from kicking him off their platform. I doubt that very much, but okay. Then she tweets, if you are watching the Cambridge Analytica story unfold, please support their journalism. And they made a lot of appeals yesterday for support, which they richly deserve, of course. Let's see. Channel 4 News took our evidence painstakingly gathered over 10 months to get permission to make their film. The Guardian and Observer's public service journalism is the bedrock of this entire transatlantic news enterprise. And it has to be transatlantic because of how much was going on both sides of the ocean on this one. One or two more, I think, tweets. Breaking news from yesterday. Facebook was inside Cambridge Analytica's office, but have now, quote, stood down following dramatic intervention by UK Information Commissioner's Office. ICO. See? The ICO is trying to get a warrant tonight. That would have been last night to go in tonight, but no judge was available. Team being assembled for tomorrow morning. I'm reading through her tweets still here. Let's see. Kudos also to great partners across the ocean at New York Times. See, they do some things right from time to time. That's what makes them so frustrating. Anything else that we can glean from yesterday's tweeting? She also says the most amazing thing about Cambridge Analytica story is how Facebook have made the wrong call every single time, literally blowing themselves up. Let's see. Finally, this could go on for some time. To be clear, Facebook was trying to secure evidence, quote unquote, secure evidence ahead of the UK authorities. That is a pretty dramatic accusation there. Nice try, Facebook. The UK Information Commissioner's Office cracking the whip. British legal investigation must take precedence over US multi-billion-dollar company. I'm okay with it. Go ahead. Don't worry. As an American, I'm not offended. Let's see. A good moment, she says, to remind U.S. voters that Professor Carroll, David Carroll, who tweets as Prof. Carroll, is leading the way in using U.S. laws to get back his personal data from Cambridge Analytica's servers. What do they know about him? How do they know it? And what did they do with it? That's everyone's question. And of course, I guess there's someone looking to use the legal system to pry it out of their hands. Let's see. Here she retweets the tweet of Damian Collins, the MP, saying Facebook have confirmed that auditors and legal counsel acting on behalf of the company were in the offices of Cambridge Analytica this evening until they were told to stand down by the Information Commissioner. These investigations need to be undertaken by the proper authorities. Carroll adding, that's the auditors and legal counsel who didn't go in there to retrieve the data in December of 2015 when Harry Fox Davies wrote the breakthrough First Guardian report. Why? That's the big question, I think, looming from yesterday's reporting and the events of yesterday evening in the UK. Why is it that Facebook was willing to accept Cambridge Analytica's self-certification that they had deleted information that Facebook thought it improper for them to have? They never did delete the information. Why would you accept the say-so of someone who had the information improperly, that it had been destroyed? I don't really know. The answer is that Cambridge Analytica, I guess, the partnership with them was just seen as being so profitable in the future that they didn't want to make waves by doubting them. So let's see. Other tweet here. Nor did Facebook turn up with auditors and legal counsel when HNSGR, who are we talking about here? Hannes Grasiger, a economist and reporter who is on Twitter there as HNSGR. I guess that's a short abbreviation for his name. Let's see. Nor did Facebook turn up with auditors and legal counsel when he and Michael Kruger wrote groundbreaking piece last year that explained how it was done, that in Vice.com. Or when we published this, Facebook refused to answer questions or acknowledge the data breach in any way, a linked piece in The Guardian. And when Schwartz published this, still Facebook denied and denied and denied. So she's here cataloging the number of pieces in both American and foreign press about this situation, which as I mentioned yesterday, there was that Intercept article of last year too, that it was very clear that a breach of some sort had happened. Facebook, though, continuing to deny that it was a breach, but even at the time denying that the information was even in anyone else's hands. It was a very amazing set of occurrences, I guess, yesterday. The fact that in raiding Cambridge Analytica's offices, authorities in the UK encountered Facebook personnel is really almost mind-blowing, I guess, in a way, except now it just seems so obvious. All right. Let's see. Much more to her Twitter stream, of course, and we'll perhaps check back in. Oh, here's a breaking thing from 12 hours ago. New details about Alexander, remember him? Alexander Kogan's research. He's the guy who put together that psychological profiling app on Facebook. A different personality quiz he was using to pull Facebook data via its API in St. Petersburg in the summer of 2014 to measure gulp, as she says, the dark triad, psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. That is a dark triad, isn't it? Well, they found their guy, and they made him president of the United States. Let's see. That's summer of 2014 when he was also pulling Facebook data for Cambridge Analytica. Summer of 2014 when Cambridge Analytica was pitching to Lukoil. Same time when Robert Mueller's indicted Russians were starting to use the platform for, quote, information warfare. Continuing on, just to get a little bit closer to the top and see if there's any more recent news. So Facebook's Russia disinfo problem blows up on New York Times front page with Alex Stamos' departure, just as company reels from 50 million data breach story. And then there's this. That was the Alexander Kogan blockbuster, I guess, of just a moment ago. Still no word, I guess, from Zuckerberg, at least at this point. And then in the last couple of hours, weird, Cambridge Analytica tweets that they didn't use Facebook data in the Trump campaign. 3 minutes later, they delete it. That sounds pretty odd. Breaking, Facebook demanding to inspect Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Chris Wiley's computer and phone. What do they want? To look through my dick pics? Could be, but I doubt it. But so what? They demand the opportunity to look through it. They are, of course, I guess they forget from time to time. You're just a private company. You're a private company trying to take over the world, true, but you haven't taken over just yet. But The more you look at this, the more it becomes clear that it really seems like this is the vehicle through which billionaires really thought they might, in fact, twirling of the mustache, take over the world. All right. Last tweet from Carol 50 minutes ago. Wow, now there's a Facebook whistleblower. Data harvested not from tens of millions of users, but from hundreds of millions of users. That, I guess maybe we can start there, although I did promise you some explanation for why all this was happening in England. Maybe we'll start there, take the break. I don't know if we'll get all the way through this piece, and then return to the latest from Carol, or what she's been tweeting about. Here, we'll give you the context that I promised. One last check, though, on what's going on Twitter, just to be sure we're up to date with everybody's comments. Yes, okay. I think we're okay. Kate Sherrill has a follow-up piece that will load on top of this that has to do with the Mercers. But first, the opinion piece by Ann Applebaum in the Washington Post over the weekend. It was a Friday piece, but not until 8 p.m. So that's why I didn't get to it, I guess, on Friday. Didn't get to it yesterday either. Now's the time. Why does Putin treat Britain with disdain? That's the headline. He thinks he's bought it. And now a lot of us wish that Vladimir Putin would buy it. Not England, but the farm, I guess. But, not in the cards anytime soon. He's a lot healthier, I think, than Donald Trump. But Russia's a dangerous place. Anyway, this actually explains, I think, a lot of why so much is happening in parallel here. Datelined in London. Londongrad. Londongrad is the nickname, not entirely affectionate, that wealthy Russians have bestowed upon Britain's capital. The term doesn't just designate a physical place, though many Russians do indeed live here. Now, the places that we end up calling Little Russia or Little Moscow or what have you around our own country, both in New York, like, say, Trump Tower, or the Trump developments in and around the Miami area. There are just certain places that they congregate. They like to stick together, and they like to buy in bulk when they're laundering their money. Londongrad, though, didn't know about that one, and it's good to bring ourselves up to date on the situation, and this helps explain why all this is developing in the UK and not here. The term doesn't just designate a physical place, though many Russians do indeed live here. Londongrad is more properly a state of mind, encompassing not only the non-resident owners of large houses in Kensington, but also the British institutions, banks, law firms, accountants, private schools, art galleries, and even the Conservative Party fundraisers that have gone out of their way to accommodate them. This does sound familiar, I think, to our American listeners as well. Not familiar that they knew that this was going on in the UK, but that they knew that this was going on in the US. Well, yeah, it's also going on in the UK, and that's why, thankfully, we actually have some additional help in doing the investigations. They've already taken over the American government. Not so sure how fruitful our investigations can be in the end, but helpful that it's going on in English elsewhere. Londongrad can be a place of bizarre contrasts. A few years ago, I found myself standing on the sideline of a school's rugby pitch, watching small boys tackle one another in the mud. All around me were the green fields of England. Cows were grazing in the middle distance. Huddled on the sidelines, a group of men, presumably, or at least originally presumably, parents of some of the small boys, were arguing loudly, in Russian, about large sums of money. Equally weird was a walk with friends in rural Hampshire, past the gates of a vast estate. Although registered to a company called Sky Mist Holdings, as estates often are, the house was in fact owned by Elena Baturina, a Russian business executive who became enormously rich while her husband, Yuri Luzkov, was mayor of Moscow. A famously lucrative position, of course. The locals knew the owner's identity because they had seen Luzkov at the pub. But otherwise, the owner's identity covered up by, I guess, another one of these stupid, untraceable companies, shell companies. These incongruities were produced by a tacit deal. For 2 decades, the British establishment has agreed not to think too hard about where the Russians got their money. Sound familiar? How cash was stolen from the state, recycled in the West. Where in the West? All over the West. Then used to help bring Vladimir Putin and his ex-KGB colleagues to power. In return, the Russians spent a lot of that money in Britain and the United States to the benefit of the British and some Americans. I have to add some commentary in this as we go along. The relationship has, at times, been extraordinarily complicit. There's that word. There was the 2006 London flotation of Rosneft, the oil company created from the stolen assets of another oil company, whose owner had been arrested and sent to prison in Siberia. That's an easy way to get rid of somebody who owns assets that you want, who won't make a deal that they can't refuse. Well, okay, they did refuse it, so fine. We're in charge of the entire Russian government. We'll sentence you for something and send you to Siberia and keep your company for ourselves. That is extraordinarily easy and convenient there. The prospectus did actually warn potential purchasers of the risks. Quote, crime and corruption could create a difficult business climate in Russia, unquote. But the sale went forward, reaped rewards for those who arranged it, and established a principle. Stolen goods can become legal as long as the London financial establishment approves. And of course, that could be run in parallel and was run in parallel in New York and elsewhere in the United States as well. We'll try and finish up this bit before our break. Now the relationship is at a low point. The British were shocked, or should I say shocked. It actually does say that in the piece, to discover that Russian operatives treat all of Britain like Londongrad. I guess that explains the widespread free-ranging murders now going on there as well. For a second time, they appear to have used a dangerous chemical agent in an attempt to murder one of their compatriots on British soil. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Theresa May eloquently condemned Russia for its use of a military-grade nerve agent, declared she would expel 23 Russian diplomats, and charged that the Russian government has, quote, demonstrated complete disdain for the gravity of these events. This much we knew. What we didn't know was the close connection we'll get to after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, I'm just going to check in before we return to this very exciting article. Scott has sent me what I hope will contain some news updates about the shooting earlier mentioned at Great Mills High School in Maryland. At least we have a count here. 3 people reportedly shot there. And I'll check in this according to WJLA, the Washington, D.C. ABC, I think, affiliate, the Dateline down there in St. Mary's County. There was a shooting Tuesday morning at a high school in St. Mary's County. Left at least 3 injured. Thankfully, no word so far, anyway, on any deaths there. Let's see. Any solid news? FBI, members of the ATFE, now explosives included in that, all heading to the scene. Sheriff's office says parents should come and pick up students, of course, not from the Great Mills School, but from nearby Leonardtown High School. I guess not that much more. Schools currently on lockdown, still up in the air, and still trying to figure out exactly what happened here. And we can take another quick look at the map here just to make sure that we were talking about the right place. Yeah, we got the location correct. All right. Monitoring the situation. Thanks very much, Scott, for bringing us at least some additional reporting on it to get some sense of the size and scope of this latest school shooting. No word exactly on how it came about and why, but very often we never get that. Okay, let's jump back to where we were in the piece explaining for us, or laying out for us, just how and perhaps why the situation is running so close in parallel with Russian interference in everything in both the UK and the US. Okay, when we last left off, Prime Minister Theresa May was condemning Russia for its use of the military-grade nerve agent in a attempted murder on British soil. A very serious problem, by the way, and not only an outlawed nerve agent, but essentially the use of a weapon of war to attempt to commit a murder on British soil. They are, of course, a NATO ally, and Russia is not. And if they're murdering people on British soil with outlawed nerve agents, that's perhaps an Article 5 situation here. And the United States would be, officially in a bad spot, let's say, were the puppet of Vladimir Putin to act in his capacity as President of the United States to separate us from our NATO allies in protection of Russia and all of this. I mean, that would now you're just falling into aid and comfort territory. You're just being an outright traitor. I'll bear witness if one of you will do the same. That'll provide our second witness, and we can finally be done with this guy. As Psycho said in the great movie Stripes, it's a fantastic film, epic adventure, as many of you remember. All I know is we finally get to execute somebody. Under the statute, I'm not saying I don't advocate for the assassination of Donald Trump. That's crazy. No one should be doing that. I'm just saying that there's a legalized version of that out there, and if you are capturing him, convicting him, trying and convicting him, and executing him under the statute defining treason, well, that's just an application of the law. All I can do, I can read you the statute all day long. That's not to say it's going to happen. It's just, I'm telling you, when you're calling for his arrest and execution, you might not be breaking the law in ways that others on Twitter might think you are. Just cite the code. That's all I can tell you. It's an easy enough thing to do. All right, and as a matter of fact, maybe we should do it right here and right now, just to let everybody know. In case you want to do the same, what would you be citing? Well, I'll give you the citation. The statutory citation in the United States, 18 U.S. Code, Section 2381, defining both the act of treason, how one would find themselves convicted of treason, and the penalties thereunder. Now, of course, it doesn't mandate their execution. I'm just saying it's out there as a possibility. That's all. No more, no less than that. Okay, so we learned, of course, that the UK government is very well aware of what Russia is doing, and not only through Cambridge Analytica, but also in these attempted murders, and some of the murders rather successful at that. But this article suggests that there is a wider accounting necessary, and that it suggests that the UK government and English society as a whole needs to come to grips with how much or how permissive they've been of Russian mischief in the past in exchange for essentially money and power. And I'm here to tell you that the Americans need to do the same, but I think you already knew that. So I'll continue with this piece. That doesn't mean, that is her comments, Prime Minister May's comments about Russia having demonstrated complete disdain for the gravity of the events. That doesn't mean she doesn't understand the profundity of the problem. That the Russian government treats Britain with disdain because the Russian government thinks it has bought the British elite. Worse than that, it may be right. On the day of May's speech, Gazprom, remember them? The state-controlled energy company that is the source of wealth for so many of Russia's leaders, issued an 8-year, nearly $1 billion Eurobond. The Russian embassy sent out a tweet announcing that the Gazprom sale was oversubscribed and added a punchline. Business as usual. On Friday, the Russian government itself sold $7 billion worth of Eurobonds. And I guess if it isn't obvious to you, there's some question here. Why is it that Russia's government and Russia's state-controlled energy company should be able to float Eurobonds? It's not a part of the European Union. They're unable to do it without a partnership in the European Union. And London famously has been, for centuries, that financial center that'll float just about anything, and people are, I guess, still currently willing to look the other way about this stuff, so long as they get a cut, and that they can use a cut of it to acquire power of their own, both in the UK and around the world. That same afternoon, as the floating of the euro bonds and the sale of $7 billion of other euro bonds by the Russian government, the same afternoon, London police officials opened another murder investigation into the death of another Russian, this time a businessman and government critic. It is being reported that investigators have detected signs that he may have been strangled. On Sunday in Moscow, the regime will reaffirm its power and hold an election that will reinstate Putin as president, as indeed it did. All of these events are connected. Our institutions, our banks, our tax havens have helped create this profoundly cynical regime in Moscow, one with no regard for our laws or political traditions, or even ours, one might say, and we are still unable to see it, though it's becoming clearer. In her parliamentary statement, the Prime Minister did leave open the possibility of harsher financial sanctions, but the real question for Britain, as well as for France, Germany, and the United States, is whether we are willing to end the financial relationship altogether. We could outlaw tax havens in the Virgin Islands, as well as in Delaware and Nevada. We could make it impossible to buy property anonymously. We could ban Russian companies with dubious origins from our stock exchanges. But that would cost our own financiers and real estate agents, disrupt the discreet flow of cash into the coffers of political parties, deprive the art market of its biggest investors. Does May have the nerve to do that? Do any of us here in the United States either? That is a good question, and I think that's the key problem that lies at the heart of this. Of course, the Russians took a calculated risk, and they were right, that Americans, that the English and others over there in the UK, but I guess because London lies at the heart of England, we'll blame it on them and let the Scots and Welsh and others off scot-free. Hey, scot-free, what do you think? But that's the question, that we've been so willing to take their money. Their money's good here, so long as it is. We let them get away with enormous, shenanigans, I guess, as certainly as broad a term as possible for it. But, does murder with banned chemical weapons, or attempted murder with banned chemical weapons, count as a shenanigan? I think it goes above and beyond. But we've looked the other way and taken their money when we know that it's all been stolen and pillaged in one way or another. But we've regarded, for instance, the conviction and exiling of the so-called, and maybe they weren't that legitimate, so-called legitimate owners of most of these raided assets as a matter internal to Russia. We can't comment on how their legal system operates. I mean, we can, but ultimately, look, they've got a government sitting there with suits and ties and flags and everything, and they say they're the government and that everything's on the up and up. Now, do you want this $1 billion or don't you? You can walk away from it and say it's dirty, but we'll just take it to someone else. And that's usually enough to get people to buy in and empower this oligarchy and kleptocracy that has operated as the Russian government or near government. There's definitely a very different structure to what goes on there, and it's very difficult to say even what is Russian government, what is Russian government connected, what is Russian, quasi-government. Where did the oligarchs themselves stand in this if they don't hold government positions but are rich by virtue of government-granted monopolies, or have effectively used the government to exile the previous owners of the assets they now control, and now they're the oligarchs? Do they owe that to the government? Do they not owe it to the government? Are they government-related, or even if they're private individuals? Lots of gray areas. I mean, we have the same gray areas here. We just have an easier way of thinking of them. They're, that are incorrect and equally distorting, but we understand what the relationships are. We don't understand them so much, and they're not all that opaque or transparent over there in Russia. They're very opaque, not very transparent. So anyway, I think a good piece for establishing the linkage and helping to explain how it is that the English are so interested in the question and are making so much progress, even as we're stalled because the entirety of our government has been co-opted, and that has not yet become the case, I guess, there in the UK. All right, let's see. Other items that we didn't get to yesterday, but that are also happening and deserving of some comment. Lots of writing about the existence of and probable invalidity of the non-disclosure agreements Trump has forced senior staff in the White House and the executive branch to sign. I guess the first splash of this came over the weekend as Ruth Marcus wrote about it in the Washington Post. Gasp! She's shocked to find out that there's another form of major league corruption happening in the government of any administration, but in particular of the Trump administration. Awful picture, by the way, illustrating the piece of Donald Trump just looking leathern and shop-worn. Trump has had senior staff sign non-disclosure agreements. They're supposed to last beyond his presidency. This is the Ruth Marcus piece in the Washington Post. You are no doubt at least up to date about the fact of their existence. And I think we have assumed that they have existed for a very long time. And I don't know whether Ruth Marcus is just finding this out. It's really hard to tell sometimes with Ruth Marcus. Or whether this is just the first that she's been able to establish, something that she too suspected for a long time. Here it is. Back in April of 2016, when the notion of Donald Trump in the White House still seemed fanciful, the Post's Robert Costa and Bob Woodward sat down with Trump, because why not? And Costa at one point raised the subject of the non-disclosure agreements for employees of which the candidate was so fond. Costa asking, one thing I always wondered, are you going to make employees of the federal government sign non-disclosure agreements? Trump answering in his typical fashion, not really aware of anything at all, other than the fact that those things exist and he likes them. I think they should, and I don't know. There could be some kind of law that says you can't do this. Again, the sort of thing that a seasoned candidate or a seasoned politician would know already, but he doesn't care about. I have people who figure this stuff out for me, right? Okay, I don't know. There could be some kind of law that says you can't do this. There is. It's Constitution. But when people are chosen by a man, and I mean a manly man, I will add, to go into government at high levels, and then they leave government and they write a book about a man, like me, for instance, and say a lot of things that were really guarded and personal. I don't like that. I mean, I'll be honest. And people would say, oh, that's terrible. You're taking away his right to free speech. Well, he's going in, meaning, you knew what you were signing up for, is his basic excuse for this. Ruth Marcus, in her imitable style, says, reader, it happened. In the early months of the administration, at the behest of now President Trump, who was furious over leaks from within the White House, senior White House staff members were asked to and did sign non-disclosure agreements vowing not to reveal confidential information and exposing them to damages for any violation. Some balked at first, but pressed by then Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and the White House counsel's office, ultimately complied, concluding that the agreements would likely not be enforceable in any event, and that's what most people are saying about them. The non-disclosure agreements, said a person who signed the document, quote, were meant to be very similar to the ones some of us signed during the campaign and during the transition. I remember the president saying, has everybody signed a confidentiality agreement like they did during the campaign, or we had at Trump Tower? Okay, well, then that at least establishes his awareness of their use. That is interesting, too, by the way. One, that they're supposed to last beyond his term in office, but two, the damages. I don't know what you might have expected ordinarily in a non-disclosure agreement. And there It's one thing to do it in the campaign. It's one thing even to do it in a transition, although that seems problematic as well. But the idea, like his normal NDAs, like the one he has with Stormy Daniels, had the liquidated damages clause in it. If you breach the agreement and leak confidential details of our relationship to anyone, you automatically owe me $1 million in liquidated damages, according to the contract. And I'm sure he likely carried something like that over into this NDA, and it's probably a part of all his NDAs. That's his prime motivator, of course. Windfalls of huge amounts of money. He loves that more than anything else. And in many cases, he probably hopes that non-disclosure agreements will be breached so that he can grasp at another $1 million or so. But it is highly questionable. I don't know how and on what grounds exactly it's being done, but we've likely all seen the news that, for instance, the ACLU has come out and said, no, our legal analysis is that these NDAs are totally unenforceable. And it may be that they're unenforceable on, freedom of speech grounds, all sorts of different claims that are being made. But I wonder if they treated this at all, if this is the case, if the NDAs claim that your service to the government, which would put you in close proximity to the president, and I guess make it possible for you to learn information that could later be disclosed and damage either, who knows, the president personally or the presidency as an institution. I don't think that it's legal or constitutional, for instance, for there to say be liquidated damages awarded to Donald Trump personally if you, by virtue of your service to the government, come in close contact with the person occupying the office of the presidency and breach some confidentiality. You could perhaps say the government has the option, if you reveal government secrets, of imprisoning you or even fining you and having the damages inure to the benefit of the government, to the Treasury. But if he's trying to say, if you speak out about something I do as president, I personally get $1 million, that should never fly. But I don't know if that's one of the provisions or not. Anyway, Ruth Marcus then continues, at that time, when he mentioned that to members of the White House and executive staffs, in February or March of 2017, the source said, there was lots of leaking, things that just weren't true, which of course aren't leaks, but made up stuff, and a lot of things that were true and should have remained confidential. Those would be leaks. The president's point was that they, the staff, would think twice about it if they were on the hook for some serious damages. The question is, to whom are they on the hook, I guess. Moreover, said the source, this confidentiality pledge would extend not only after an aide's White House service, but also beyond the Trump presidency. It's not meant to be constrained by the 4 years or 8 years he's president, or the 4 months or 8 months somebody works there. It is meant to survive that. This is extraordinary. Every president inveighs against leakers and bemoans the kiss and tell books. No president, to my knowledge, has attempted to impose such a pledge. And while White House staffers have various confidentiality obligations, maintaining the secrecy of classified information or attorney-client privilege, for instance, the notion of imposing a side agreement, supposedly enforceable even after the president leaves office, is not only oppressive, but constitutionally repugnant. Unlike employers, or rather employees of private enterprises such as the Trump Organization, or the Trump campaign even, White House aides have First Amendment rights when it comes to their employer, the federal government. If you have a leaker on your staff, the cure is firing, not suing. This is crazy, said attorney Deborah Katz, who has represented numerous government whistleblowers and negotiated non-disclosure agreements. The idea of having some kind of economic penalty is an outrageous effort to limit and chill speech. Once again, this president believes employees owe him a personal duty of loyalty when their duty of loyalty is to the institution. I haven't been able to lay my hands on the final agreement, but I do have a copy of a draft, and it's a doozy, Ruth writes. It would expose violators to penalties of $10 million. payable to the federal government. Okay. Well, that's at least helpful, although still not constitutional, I'm sure. For each and any unauthorized revelation of, quote, confidential information, defined as, quote, all non-public information I learn of or gain access to in the course of my official duties in the service of the United States government on the White House staff, including communications with members of the press and with employees of federal, state, and local governments. The $10 million figure, I suspect, was watered down in the final version because the people to whom I have spoken do not remember that jaw-dropping sum. It would prohibit revelation of this confidential information in any form, including, get this, the publication of works of fiction that contain any mention of the operations of the White House, federal agencies, foreign governments, or other entities interacting with the United States government that is based on confidential information. As outlined in the document, this restriction would cover Trump aides not only during their White House service, but also at all times thereafter. The document then says, I understand that the United States government, or upon the completion of the term of Mr. Donald J. Trump, an authorized representative of Mr. Trump, may seek any remedy available to enforce this agreement, including but not limited to application for a court order prohibiting disclosure of information in breach of this agreement. This is so ridiculously excessive, so laughably unconstitutional that I doubted when it first came my way that anything like it was ever implemented, only to do some reporting and learn otherwise. It's sad that it took so long, to be honest. Ruth Marcus, not a fan, to be blunt about it. Ordinarily, I would insert a response from the White House, but this is no ordinary White House. It dealt with my numerous requests for comment to the press office, the counsel's office, etc., with complete silence. The draft made its way to me after I wrote a column observing that Trump's silence buying and silence compelling days were done. Now we know that he imported these bullying tactics into the White House, which raises the obvious question, why is he so consistently frantic to ensure that no one knows what goes on behind closed doors? It actually raises this obvious question for me. She links to having the column she wrote, observing that Trump's silence buying and silence compelling days were done. And my question is, what is the date of that article? The answer is March 15th, and that is super, super disappointing. Okay. That is very interesting. I've just gotten a text here, which is equally interesting, from a phone number I don't recognize, telling me I can't talk right now. Okay, I can't either. Why am I getting this text? I don't know. Well, we'll check that out afterwards. So here's the deal. Ruth Marcus has never really been in touch at all, ever, that I can remember, with the reality of what was going on in administrations that were abusing power. This was my recollection of her from during the George W. Bush administration, when it was finally revealed that they had been surveilling Americans without a warrant in violation of the Constitution. She was one of the first of the columnists out of the box to say, oh my goodness, no. We can't be talking about impeachment here. This is absolutely awful. You're totally overstepping your bounds. This is just a nasty, nasty thing that we should deal with in some fashion. And then, of course, never got around to describing what the fashion would be. Similarly here, on March 15th, she's right. Is this 2018? I mean, I guess so. It doesn't say otherwise. But honestly, for Ruth Marcus to be sitting there in Washington, D.C., in the middle of the Washington Post, and on March 15th be writing things like, Trump won't be able to buy his way out of trouble this time, and claiming that it was a piece claiming that his silence buying and silence compelling days were done last week. And then, surprise, someone says to me, oh, he actually did impose a non-disclosure agreement. He tried and actually did go ahead with non-disclosure agreements for White House staff on March 16th. And for this to come as a complete shock to her is really amazing. And just, I don't know, it's not amazing because it's just another disappointing chapter in Ruth Marcus is a bubble-headed idiot and has no idea what's going on in Washington, D.C. and should never be read other than to mock her amazement at what's been going on around her. Why she continues to be featured at the Washington Post, I have no idea. But again, and occasionally she serves as a good jumping off point to either drive home a point or restate the thesis that she's got no idea what's going on in Washington, D.C., and neither do most of the journalistic elite, even the Washington Post, which has done a tremendously better job than the New York Times in all of this, at least in, I don't know, in general credulity. I got no idea. I don't know where to levy my criticisms any longer. We'll be back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. I believe I may have gone further into the speech prior to the break than I wanted to. All I was saying was I was once again befuddled and unsure of where all of my criticism actually properly belonged. I sometimes am given to the opinion that the Washington Post is doing a better job than the New York Times in staying out of their, I don't know, elitist bubble. And sometimes I see things like this from Ruth Marcus, and that all falls apart. On the other hand, I enthusiastically join in Armando's criticism and the criticism many of you levy against the New York Times, and then occasionally read something and say, see, now I'm glad. It's not that easy to conclude one way or the other what's happening in the paper. This is obviously a nuanced situation. Some people are better than others at what they're doing. Some people who occasionally appear to have knuckled under to access journalism nonetheless produce a brilliant insight. And so I guess it's just stupid for me to try to conclude one way or another how an entire paper is doing, and I should probably stop. Yet I will indulge in it, I'm sure, in the future. Nonetheless, okay. What else do we need to catch up on? So many things. Don't know exactly which of them, if any, can derail us from the overarching narrative. But I have been remiss in noting the following, and I'll break my whole criticism of the New York Times and Washington Post wide open and hypocritically read you, hopefully quickly, a piece from the editorial board of the New York Times, which I have no business reading anymore, but just by way of bringing you up to date on what's going on in Chris Kobach's world. Chris Kobach's voting sham gets exposed in court. I mentioned to you the other day that they were in the middle of a trial about his various voter fraud scams, essentially, and how he was doing so poorly, particularly for a Harvard-trained lawyer, in all of this. And apparently it's just been a blowout in court, and they're just daily embarrassed on his side. I mean, by the standards of right-thinking people, I guess is what I should say. Here's the editorial board's entry from Saturday. This is they say, part of a series on voting in America, which will run up to Election Day in November. I guess few and far between. For part one on the importance of voting, they send you to their previous entry. But for this purpose, my purpose is of bringing you up to date on what Kobach is doing in court. I'll just read you this. The modern American crusade against voter fraud has always been propelled by faith. That is, an insistent belief in things unseen. Things like voters who show up at the polls pretending to be someone else, or non-citizens who try to register and vote illegally. Fraud like this, as you and I both know, is so rare as to be almost unmeasurable. And yet, its specter has led to dozens of strict new laws around the country, passed in the name of electoral integrity. The laws, which usually require voters to present photo ID at the polls or provide proof of citizenship to register, making voting harder, if not impossible, for tens of thousands of people, disproportionately minorities and others who tend to vote Democratic. The high priest of this faith-based movement is Chris Kobach, the Kansas Secretary of State and gubernatorial candidate who has been preaching its gospel of deception to Republican lawmakers for years. He has won plenty of converts, including the president, even though he has failed to identify more than a tiny handful of possible cases of fraud. In his 8 years as Secretary of State, he has secured a total of 9 convictions, only one of which was for illegal voting by a non-citizen, most of which were for double voting by older Republican men. For the past 2 weeks, however, Mr. Kobach has been forced to make his case in a far more rigorous setting, the fact-finding process of a federal trial. In a Kansas City courtroom, Mr. Kobach and his fellow true believers have struggled to defend a 2013 state law which requires prospective voters to prove their citizenship before they can register. It has not gone well for Mr. Kobach. The lawsuit brought by the ACLU on behalf of Kansas residents who were blocked from voting under the new law contends that the legislation violates federal law, which requires that only that a prospective voter attest to their citizenship under penalty of perjury. Meanwhile, it disenfranchised tens of thousands of Kansans who were disproportionately younger voters or voters with no party affiliation. And how many non-citizens did the law stop from voting? Squint really hard, like Donald Trump doing a Saturday video address. One would think that after all these years, Mr. Kobach would have something to show for his dogged efforts. Yet, according to his own witnesses, Kansas, which has 1.8 million registered voters, has identified 129 non-citizens, it says, registered or tried to register since 2000. That's a long time ago. Of those 129 people, 11 actually voted. And it's not clear how many of these cases represent intentional fraud as opposed to honest mistakes or clerical errors. But Mr. Kobach is convinced, calling these findings the tip of the iceberg. If so, the iceberg is melting fast. Mr. Kobach's game may work with partisan lawmakers, but not with federal judges. At the beginning of the trial, Mr. Kobach, who is representing himself, tried to introduce what he said were new data on the number of Kansans whose voter registrations were suspended for lacking proof of citizenship. Judge Julie Robinson of Federal District Court said no, reminding him that the deadline for introducing pretrial evidence had passed the night before. "We're not going to have a trial by ambush here," the judge said when Mr. Kobach tried again a few days later. "How does it feel to have your papers out of order, Mr. Kobach?" Best point of the piece. Of course, restrictive voting laws like these have never been about protecting electoral integrity. They're about keeping certain people away from the ballot box, often based on who they are or are assumed to be. On Tuesday, one of Mr. Kobach's witnesses, a political scientist, Jesse Richmond, testified that up to 18,000 non-citizens have registered or tried to register in Kansas. When the ACLU's lawyer asked him about his methods for analyzing the state's list of suspended voters, Mr. Richmond said that, among other things, he flagged foreign-sounding names. Does that sound like a good methodology to you? Foreign-sounding names. What about a name like Carlos Murguia? Murguia. M-U-R-G-U-I-A. Murguia. The lawyer asked. Would he flag that one? Yes, Mr. Richmond said. He was then informed that Carlos Murguia is a federal district judge who sits in the courthouse where the trial is being held. It all seems like a big joke until you remember that laws like these have already had their intended effect. In Kansas, more than 22,000 people who tried to register had their applications suspended or canceled for not having proof of citizenship. And in Wisconsin, which President Trump won by fewer than 23,000 votes, a strict voter ID law kept at least 17,000 voters from the polls in 2016. And again, just in case someone listening has some questions about it, or more likely encounters questions. But, well, what's wrong with asking people to prove their citizenship? It's not that bad, but of course the old system essentially required that proof anyway, simply by saying you are attesting to your own citizenship under penalty of perjury. If it turns out that you're not a citizen, and we find out about it, you will be prosecuted and you can go to jail for it. But proving it up front, basically like a stand your ground law for voter registration. We just want to put a legal burden on you that you were supposed to be willing to accept as a matter of perjury later on, but rather instead of saying, well, if we suspect it, we'll prove our case, we make you prove the opposite of that case up front, instead of simply attesting to your citizenship and being willing to back it up by being willing to stand trial for perjury if it's not true. We're going to have a mini trial right here. Bring us your paperwork. Is that a problem? Well, I don't know. It was a big problem for Chris Kobach. His paperwork wasn't in order when he needed to be on time with it in court. Can you see how this sort of thing might happen to a well-intentioned fellow simply by accident or by dint of being, busy elsewhere in life? And he has nothing else going on in his life. Remember also that just days after the 2016 election, Mr. Kobach scored a meeting with President-elect Trump in which he urged the passage of a nationwide proof of citizenship requirement. A few months later, Mr. Trump appointed Mr. Kobach to head his so-called Election Integrity Commission. In January, after months of futility and infighting, the commission folded, having made no findings and issued no recommendations. No surprise there, there's virtually nothing to find. There has been no epidemic of non-citizens voting, despite Mr. Trump's baseless claim, endorsed by Mr. Kobach, that he lost the popular vote only because of millions of illegal voters. And there are hardly any examples of in-person voter fraud, the only kind that could conceivably be stopped by voter ID laws. A federal judge once compared such laws to using a sledgehammer to hit either a real or imaginary fly on a glass coffee table. Unfortunately, the courts have not always brought the appropriate degree of skepticism to these laws. The Supreme Court upheld the first voter ID law it considered in 2008, even though the Indiana lawmakers who passed it had not identified a single case of fraud that the law would have prevented. Which they, by the way, every time you bring up the idea of gun control, well, that wouldn't have necessarily prevented this shooting or that shooting. That's enough for them there. But when it comes to quote-unquote voter fraud, no amount of prevention is too much. Former Justice John Paul Stevens, who wrote in the opinion on that case, later called it a fairly unfortunate decision. Richard Posner, a former federal appeals court judge who also upheld the Indiana law, later said that voter ID laws are, quote, now widely regarded as a means of voter suppression rather than of fraud prevention. More recently, courts have gotten better about questioning the evidence and rationale for these laws, striking down some of the strictest ones, like in Texas and North Carolina, for deliberately discriminating against minority voters. That's the right approach. These laws masquerade as common sense measures, but they are in truth anti-democratic shams, and it's gratifying to see them unravel in the harsh light of a federal courtroom. Gratifying enough for me to spend a considerable amount of time reading you that piece, as a matter of fact. Another thing which we haven't gotten to, but which requires attention, perhaps on another date, though, because we're rapidly approaching the end of today's show. But it does bear mentioning the reporting that New York City is launching an investigation into the Kushner companies for their false filings. Long story short on this one, the Kushner company's fantastic success, if you want to call it that, in real estate development in New York City, all about to be flushed down the toilet when their stupid flagship building goes under at 666 Fifth Avenue. Smaller projects, though, have been a success, and they've had this amazing success and moved rather rapidly in being able to redevelop entire swaths of New York City, all based on fraud. How do you like that? Let's read you the lead of this piece. I know you're already aware of it, but we want to put it on the record here. A New York City Council member launched an investigation Monday into the Kushner Company's routine filing of paperwork, falsely claiming 0 rent-regulated tenants in its buildings, saying that the deception should have been uncovered long ago because the documents are online for all to see. Yes, it should have been. Councilman Richie Torres said the city's buildings department should have spotted the falsified numbers because they were contradicted by tax documents filed with another city agency, one hand not knowing what the other is doing, I guess. This, by the way, reported by Bernard Condon of AP and running in, everywhere. The New York Times, Independent Mail, as I've got right here for whatever reason, and many other papers around the country and around the world. The scandal is not only the deception of the Kushner companies, the scandal is the dysfunction of the city bureaucracy, said Torres, chair of the City Council's Investigations Committee, the right hand of city government not knowing, again, what the left hand was doing. I just said that. How interesting. The AP reported Sunday that tenants' rights watchdogs found that the Kushner companies had filed more than 80 construction permit applications for 34 buildings across the city between 2013 and 2016, basically for which they would need the permission they would have needed for the work that they were doing and the development work that they were doing was to certify to the city, look, this will not have any impact on any rent-regulated units or tenants. And so if it doesn't have an impact, it's a lot easier to fast-track approval for the project. So the Kushner companies simply said, we don't have any here. And it showed up. It said 0. They stamped it. They approved it. The project went ahead. But no, it was a lie. They simply said they had 0 rent-regulated tenants and units in those projects in order to get the approval they wanted to renovate and then flip the buildings and make millions of dollars. But it was all BS. They actually had very many rent-controlled units and tenants in those buildings. They simply lied to make money. And for whatever reason, the city doesn't catch it. The falsified documents allowed the Kushner companies to escape extra scrutiny during construction projects when the family real estate developer was run by Jared Kushner, now senior advisor, of course, to Donald Trump. Housing Rights Initiative, a watchdog group, said the falsified documents made it easier for the Kushner companies to harass rent-regulated tenants so that it could push out low-paying tenants and replace them with higher-paying ones. How often did it happen? I almost skipped this part. As I said, 80 permits over 34 buildings. Tax documents showed that there were, in fact, not 0, but more than 300 rent-regulated units in those projects. So basically, they just falsified their information so that they could get the paperwork they needed fast-tracked and renovate and flip buildings, make millions of dollars. And just like his security clearances, they've just simply, we made some mistakes along the way. It's a much more involved article and a more involved story, but I just wanted to at least put it on radar. We'll have to get back to it. I'm sure we will on another day, but we haven't yet mentioned it. All right, let's see. Other things that we might have to enter on the record. Oh, yes. By the way, here's the latest in policing innovations in Austin, thanks to all the bombings. The last bomb to go off inside Austin, as I understand it, was triggered by a tripwire rather than any kind of timer or remote control device or whatever, which is very interesting. You don't see that a whole lot. And the police in Texas, I guess, have responded by telling Austin residents to stay indoors. That way they won't walk through any tripwires. It's the capital of Texas. We'll just stay indoors. Don't go anywhere. Don't leave your house. That's how we're going to deal with the bombing. I don't know what else to tell people, but, other than be careful, that's not very reassuring either. I just thought that was really rather interesting. Okay, so quarantine for the entire city, and then we'll all be good. All right. A million other things that we could do, a million other takes on Cambridge Analytica and Facebook that we could enter into, and there are a lot of good ones out there. And in fact, even a relatively interesting look at Donald Trump and his administration entitled "We're All Watching the Donald Trump Show" in The Atlantic by McKay Coppins, which I might already otherwise skip because I'm so tired of seeing everybody compare things in Donald Trump's world to reality shows. But this piece actually acknowledges that hackneyed approach and then throws us, I thought, a pretty good reason why it might, in fact, be an apt comparison after all. And I think we can maybe sneak that in, if not the entirety of the article, and then still get to one crucial piece that I think will be necessary going forward into the day's news. McKay Coppins puts it this way: perhaps the most remarkable thing about the latest torrent of White House in chaos headlines is the degree to which President Trump seems to be enjoying it all. He isn't, although he actually is, lashing out in anger over the breathless Beltway speculation about which aide or cabinet secretary he'll fire next. That's not what he's angry about. He isn't acting swiftly to tamp down on coverage of ongoing shakeups or to change the news cycle or to return the administration to a state of relative calm and stability. He can't do that. Instead, it appears he's leaning into the maelstrom, relishing it, joking about it, maybe even courting it. And why is that interesting this time around? And it may just be that he is dumb enough to actually view his presidency as something of a reality show. That's hackneyed. It's been reported before. It's been supposed before. But maybe it sheds a little bit of additional light on what's going on here now these days. And the way he's handling not only the vacancies that are coming open as he fires people, but what he's going to do to replace them. He is, as was often predicted, approaching it like the elimination section of a game show, which is disturbing and weird, and he's unqualified and idiotic. And I just wanted to kind of take note of that latest observation on that front. I think, though, we're probably better served in our closing minutes with another entry from Zeynep Tufekci, I'm going to guess again at that pronunciation. She hasn't missed yet on this subject, and she's got an entry in the opinion section of the New York Times yesterday that I think bears some sharing here. Facebook's surveillance machine. Once again, I think going at Facebook and with the thesis that this was perhaps more deliberate than even I'm willing to charge them with in all this. And I think probably those people who joined in latter days, I think, should have been much more aware of the ominous warnings as they were brought up. I think it's almost still excusable if you were one of the originals, like even although, I mean, Zuckerberg's under some serious obligation to grow the F up already and figure out what's going on. But in early days, I guess it was perhaps forgivable. Anyway, let's take a look at what she's got on this as a closer here. In 2014, Cambridge Analytica, a voter profiling company that would later provide services for the Trump campaign, right, reached out with a request on Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform. Do you remember this? I think we actually have called that name before, but in a different context, along with like TaskRabbit and stuff. But they put out this thing on Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform in 2014. It was, of course, an online marketplace where people around the world contract with others to perform various tasks, right? Cambridge Analytica was looking for people who were American Facebook users. It offered to pay them to download and use a personality quiz app on Facebook called This Is Your Digital Life. That's the one that we identified yesterday and mentioned again earlier today. About 270,000 people, as we know, installed the app in return for $1 or $2 per download. The app scraped information from their Facebook profiles as well as detailed information from their friends' profiles. Facebook then provided all of this data to the makers of the app, who in turn turned it over to Cambridge Analytica. A few 100,000 people may not seem like a lot, but because Facebook users have a few hundred friends each on average, the number of people whose data was harvested reached about 50 million. And now, of course, we think it may be in the hundreds of millions, right? Most of those people had no idea that their data was being siphoned off. After all, they hadn't installed the app themselves, let alone that the data would be used to shape voter targeting and messaging for Mr. Trump's presidential campaign. This weekend, after all this was exposed by the New York Times and the Observer of London, put those in reverse order, I'd say, Facebook hastily made a public announcement that it was suspending Cambridge Analytica over a year after the election, and vehemently denied that this was a data breach. Paul Gruel, a vice president and deputy general counsel at Facebook, wrote that the claim that this is a data breach is completely false. He contended that Facebook users knowingly provided their information, no systems were infiltrated, and no passwords or sensitive pieces of information were stolen or hacked. He also said that everyone involved gave their consent. Mr. Gruel is right. This wasn't a breach in the technical sense. It is something even more troubling. An all too natural consequence of Facebook's business model, which involves having people go to their site for social interaction only to be quietly subjected to an enormous level of surveillance. The results of that surveillance are used to fuel a sophisticated and opaque system for narrowly targeting advertisements and other wares to Facebook's users. Facebook makes money, in other words, by profiling us and then selling our attention to advertisers, political actors, and others. These are Facebook's true customers, whom it works hard to please. Facebook doesn't just record every click and like on the site, it also collects browsing histories. It also purchases external data, like financial information about users, though European nations have some regulations that block some of this. Facebook recently announced its intent to merge, quote, offline data, things that you do in the physical world, such as making purchases in brick-and-mortar stores, with its vast online databases. Facebook even creates shadow profiles of non-users. That is, even if you are not on Facebook, the company may well have compiled a profile of you inferred from data provided by your friends or from other data. This is an involuntary dossier from which you cannot opt out in the United States. Despite Facebook's claims to the contrary, everyone involved in the Cambridge Analytica data siphoning incident did not give his or her, quote, consent, at least not in any meaningful sense of the word. It is true that if you found and read all the fine print on the site, you might have noticed that in 2014, your Facebook friends had the right to turn over all your data through such apps. Facebook has since turned off maybe this feature, I would add the maybe. If you had managed your way through a bewildering array of options, you might have even discovered how to turn that feature off. This wasn't informed consent. This was the exploitation of user data and user trust. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you had explicitly consented to turn over your Facebook data to another company. Do you keep up with the latest academic research on computational inference? Did you know that algorithms now do a pretty good job of inferring a person's personality traits, sexual orientation, political views, mental health status, substance abuse history, and much more from his or her Facebook likes? And that there are new applications of this data being discovered every day? Given this confusing and rapidly changing state of affairs about what the data may reveal and how it may be used, consent to ongoing and extensive data collection can neither be fully informed nor truly consensual, especially since it's practically irrevocable. What did Cambridge Analytica do with all that data? With whom else might it have shared it? In 2015, Facebook sent a stern letter to Cambridge Analytica asking that the data be deleted. CA employees have said the company merely checked the box, indicating that the data was deleted, at which point Facebook decided not to inform the 50 million users who were affected by the breach, nor to make the issue public, nor to sanction Cambridge Analytica at the time. The New York Times and the Observer of London are reporting that the data was not deleted, and Cambridge Analytica employees are claiming that the data formed the backbone of the company's operations in the 2016 presidential election. If Facebook failed to understand that this data could be used in dangerous ways, that it shouldn't have let anyone harvest data in this manner, and that a third party ticking a box on a form wouldn't free the company from responsibility, it had no business collecting anyone's data in the first place. But the vast infrastructure Facebook has built to obtain data and its consequent $500 billion market capitalization suggests that the company knows all too well the value of this kind of vast data surveillance. And of course, it absolutely does. Okay, where's my pointer? Here we go. Should we all leave Facebook? That may sound attractive. but it's not a viable solution. In many countries, Facebook and its products simply are the internet. Some employers and landlords demand to see Facebook profiles, and there are increasingly vast swaths of public and civic life, from volunteer groups to political campaigns to marches and protests, that are accessible or organized only via Facebook. The problem here goes well beyond Cambridge Analytica and what it may have done. What other apps were allowed to siphon data from millions of Facebook users? What if one day Facebook decides to suspend from its site a presidential campaign or a politician whose platform calls for things like increased data privacy for individuals and limits on data retention and use? What if it decides to share data with one political campaign and not another? What if it gives better ad rates? To candidates who align with its own interests? Or anything else for that matter. A business model based on vast data surveillance and charging clients to opaquely target users based on this kind of extensive profiling will inevitably be misused. The real problem is that billions of dollars are being made at the expense of the health of our public sphere and our politics, and crucial decisions are being made unilaterally and without recourse or accountability. I couldn't agree more. Well, I would if I had more time. Anyway, we'll tell you what you'll agree with on the upcoming program if you stay tuned to Netroots Radio, which you should.
From Daily Kos Radio.
Right after
on
this.
netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Wow, much to come, of course, on the Cambridge Analytica data mining story. Pardon me, wow, brought to you by Justice Putnam. As soon as I stopped drowning on the water that I took down the wrong pipe in the last seconds of the show, I apologize, Justice. You know you should be listening. Do stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow.